Welcome, everybody. This is the Architectural Board of Review, March 7th. So our chairman is not here, so our first order of business is to elect a chairman pro tem.
I move for Ed Deegan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call. Member Cottrell.
Aye.
Member Deegan.
Aye.
Member Kerouac.
Aye.
And Member Stradiff.
Aye.
Great. Well, Ed, congratulations. You can
Yeah.
take the
Thanks
gavel.
Thanks for letting me know this was
Yep.
going to happen.
Sure.
That's a resume material right there.
Totally. It's just what I need.
I guess perhaps first we should have done roll call, but we can do that now. I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, roll call. Member Cottrell.
Here.
Member Deegan.
Here.
Member Kerouac.
Here.
Member Stradiff. And members Dahlman and Chair Hunter are absent. Okay. Okay, with that, I'll turn the meeting over to you to chair.
You're going to have to give me some guidance.
Okay, sure. If you guys want to slide over so you're in the normal chairman spot.
Did we
you
hit the
can.
button?
I did. I
Okay,
did hit
great.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so minutes are next.
Okay. The meeting's been called to order?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
called it
You
to
called
order.
it order.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
right.
All right.
So,
So consideration of the February 7th, 2022 Architectural Board of Review meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments?
It's 2023, I think would
Sorry,
be the first.
2023.
No, I know, it's written 2022.
I was reading what's current. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
it is actually correct on the minutes, just not the agenda.
Yeah.
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 I wasn't here for that, so did you guys have any changes, adjustments, comments?
I move to approve as submitted.
I'll second.
Minutes approved.
Well, I'll do a vote, or I think we can do it by voice vote. Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, okay. Sorry, I'm taking your role, but that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Sure.
The next item of business is non-agenda items from visitors. So anything in regards to public comment that is not on the agenda, does anybody have any commentary or would like to speak on that? No? Okay.
Let's call item 5 out of the order, just so we can announce that we're not going to discuss it tonight.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and do that. So just in case anyone's here for item 5, the Glen Avenue footbridge and related landscaping, we're, at the request of one of the neighbors, we're postponing that till April. I take it nobody was here for that item? Everyone's here for the building codes? Okay, we can go to that.
Okay,
If you want to call the item, then I'll give an introduction.
sure.
Yeah.
Now, a public hearing to adopt new editions of the building codes and modify local amendments thereto.
Okay. So we have, we've been discussing, over the last year or so, updating our building codes, adopting the 2018 edition of the International Code Council's codes, going from the current 2015 edition and making some, modifications and updates to our local code amendments as part of that process. So the draft you have in front of you is kind of the end result of those discussions. A lot of it's familiar, although there's a couple last-minute changes here. One thing that we've been talking about for the last couple months is establishing a procedure to consider exemption or partial exemption requests from our mandate for retrofit installation of fire sprinklers, and that's in this edition of the code, of the draft code. One very recent change that came out of our latest discussion with the village board, where we were discussing the existing fire sprinkler mandate, where commercial and multifamily buildings have to be sprinklered by January 1st, 2026, and discussing adding an exemption process that people can apply for to that process. The village board asked that we consider changing the past exemption for churches from this requirement. So since everyone else had been given 15 years to comply, what we're suggesting in this draft is if we're going to include churches in here again, as the village board asked, that we give them 15 years from now, or essentially rounding up a little bit to give them just over 15 years, as other people were given 15 years. And, you know, one of the notable things about this, which is different from the past mandate, is that now we're proposing to have an exemption process that people could apply for. So just as, you know, the Park District could apply for an exemption possibly for the, you know, the bathrooms on the beach or whatever, you know, the churches could also potentially apply for an exemption, you know, for this and make the case whether they should or shouldn't, or have a partial exemption if certain rooms are difficult to add sprinklers to or whatever. So that could be considered in the exemption process as a case-by-case basis. But the proposal is to add them into the code as required. And then the village board also asked us to, in addition to the date certain retrofit requirement, to also make the provisions in the code about having to install sprinklers when you remodel a space more stringent than what is in the international existing building code, because the existing building code really gives a couple outs to the requirement to add sprinklers that in effect means that very few people have to add it by their provision. You know, they have one out that if you have to increase your water service size in order to do it, that you don't have to add the sprinklers during the remodel, which ends up exempting a lot of people. So, you know, per that suggestion from the village board, we've added into this draft a provision about those buildings that are subject to the sprinkler retrofit mandate of either the 2026 or 2038 dates, that if they remodel more than 50% of a building or tenant space, that then they have to add the sprinklers in. And with that, I think that's the other items are pretty familiar to you. I don't, you know, see gigantic changes between 2018 versus 2015 edition of these codes. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ed, to run.
Maybe we could start a discussion here first. Does anybody have any comments? Scott, do you want to jump in first about any comments that you're seeing that?
One thing I meant to add in my introduction and forgot to mention. So we are suggesting, because we haven't had a lot of time to do outreach to the public, we're suggesting we start the public hearing tonight, you know, hear comments from the board and the public tonight, and then also continue it to April 4th so people have more time to, for the public to read the draft and comment too. Okay, so, sorry, back to you, Scott.
One thing that comes to mind, only because I've been through this drill before with some of my own projects, is to what exactly it means to remodel 50% of a building. We've found we've had a very difficult time, you know, actually defining that.
Right.
You know, because there's so many elements to a building, especially in a renovation project. Is it just simply the square footage, or is it, you know, breaking it down into every single trade and vendor in terms of things being replaced in the building? So I guess a suggestion would be to try to unfold that a little bit more and dig a little deeper into defining what that may be, what that may mean.
Okay, that is a good suggestion, because I do understand that concern.
That's all I had.
The other question I had, and I may be speaking out of turn, but when you talk about kind of strengthening the provisions for when you are remodeling, and to that end, the 50% rule, what's the motivation for doing that? Because you said the village board kind of stepped forward and said, hey, we want to make this a stronger than what's currently in the code, and just curious as to what's motivating that.
Well, I think it's looking at the history of, we've had the retrofit requirement for the commercial spaces in for 15 years. And I think at the time it was started, there was maybe a perception that some of these were gonna, do it as part of remodelings or something over time. But what we found is that, when we initially had a very short, I think 3-year mandate in the just before 2010, a bunch of buildings, added the sprinklers, but in the meantime, from 2010 to now, we really haven't had any, or one maybe of the buildings that are subject to the 2026 mandate. I think only one has added sprinklers. So I think it's partly the history and how few are doing it as part of their remodels.
Gotcha.
We had one tenant in I think a 5-unit or 6-unit commercial building who 2 or 3 years ago was remodeling their whole space, and we said, in 2026 you have to have sprinklers in. You might want to put the pipes and heads in now, and you're not obligated to connect it at the other end yet until 2026, but at least then you wouldn't have to tear your ceiling apart in your space. And they said, well, we only have a 5-year lease and it's up 2024 or 2025 before the date. And they said, well, we don't know if we're gonna be here then, so we can't afford to do it as part of our remodel. So that, that type of thing was kind of disappointing, because now we have to tell somebody to go back and, tear their ceiling up to put those heads in when
Got
they didn't do it as part of the recent remodel.
So that's the impetus for this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
okay.
right.
Matt, do you want to jump in?
I had the exact same issue as Scott, in terms of, I know like back in Highland Park, residentially, we define demolition, like, roof, exterior walls, foundation, each had a percentage.
Right.
I would suggest maybe there's a percentage of walls, some kind of
Walls,
features.
ceiling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of a value or something, because that's a true remodel versus just adding, pretties to a space, which could be considered remodeling, but it's not impacting the structure. Because you can, I think we're just gonna be fighting pushbacks from now on in terms of, to your point about someone leasing, ending up before the 26th, who's paying for it? Is it the tenant? Is it the building owner? And then I think it could halt a lot of, renovations, because it's just going to trigger an extra cost that is, maybe not, compatible with what the revenue is going to be, in getting that back. So it's going to be a tough one for us, I think. And I think, as I stated at our last meeting, that when we discussed this, is a lot of this feels a little bit above at least my pay grade, in terms of saying this business is exempt because of like the furrier, because that would totally annihilate his inventory. It may be an insurance issue with them, and then I know that the fire chief or whoever, should weigh in more than we do on some of this, because we can be sympathetic to a business owner for certain reasons that, the fire department may say, no, that's not a valid reason to give an exemption. So I think we're, just as we've been chasing exemptions for signage, which seems somewhat harmless, this seems to be a little bit more of a life safety issue, a financial issue, all those things coming together. That we either need some education on, before we are involved in any of these exemption conversations, if we're the board to do that, or whoever the board is to do that.
Well, one provision that the, village board asks us to add in there that I think helps in that regard is that they, suggested that we have a consultant evaluate the applications for exemptions and weigh in on some of those questions of fire resistance and danger and all that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And then, we talked about the few situations that we'll have, in some of these beautiful churches, in the the ComEd building, in Green Bay, things that, there's going to be, it'll just be an interesting ride for us, I think. And
Right.
we do want to do right by the fire department, life safety issues, and our business members, in the community. We don't want to create an issue where we're stopping progress in, someone's business, and then creating an obstacle for someone to do renovations. But I totally appreciate why we need to do this. I just think it becomes a very involved issue,
Right.
for these exemptions.
Right.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
The only thing I would say is, I agree that Island Park has a nicely detailed, I'm sure you're familiar with it, in their
Right.
zoning ordinance about what demolition is.
Right.
And you just might want to lift that
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
from them. And,
Right.
not sure whether copyright issues come into play or not.
I don't think so. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Presumably without the basement or roof provisions, more focused on
Right.
interior walls and ceiling, yeah.
Well, wouldn't that have I've got a couple of questions, just not on this, but in more general. They're adopting the IBC and the IRC,
Right,
and a single-family residence, whatever you're doing to it, would be governed by the IRC.
yeah, that's right, yep, that's right, yep.
And then it seems to be confusing to me just what, it has a line through these things, and does the line mean, like, take page 12?
Sure. Yeah, so the line through are local amendments that are
So
being
that's just
deleted.
really a highlight, would be the equivalent of a,
Well, the double underline in bold is the new text being added that's highlighted, but the line through it is old amendments that are being deleted. So some of that text is being deleted because it's very similar to requirements that are actually already in the international codes. So we don't really need a local amendment to say it in some cases.
oh, I see, now I think I'm following it now, okay.
And then some things have been moved from one section to another for better organization. So there's a lot of the site plan requirements were moved to organize things better to, instead of having, to separate out requirements for the contractor to follow during construction from requirements for the architect to follow during plans, drawing plans we separated those out to organize it a little better instead of mixing all those together.
Do we want to hear what
Yeah.
the audience members want to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Please.
And I'm sorry to jump in front of you guys, but I just wanted to clarify a couple things, if I may, because Chair Pro Tem Deegan has declared the public hearing open. If you are going to receive public testimony tonight, you need to swear in, and I've prepared a statement for you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, great.
thanks.
But before, just to clarify a little bit about what I believe the village board's goals are with regards to the fire sprinkler. And you guys have talked a little bit about this and talking about the exemption process to date. And Mike has shared a presentation with you all. Just maybe a little bit of a rewind. So the board did discuss that in the context of establishing this exemption process to take care of some structures, some types of structures that village staff, Mike's predecessor, had already determined that these won't apply. These regulations shall not apply for obvious reasons, open-sided structures, very small and so forth, that it didn't make sense in terms of occupancy loads and types of uses, et cetera. So I think when staff set out on that journey, it was to create a process to clearly allow those property owners to come through and seek an exemption from those requirements. the conversation expanded at the board level, and there was a bit of a history lesson as to, well, tell us why the churches were excluded. Why did that happen originally? And so that past was shared, and then there was some level of concern with the level of occupancy in those structures, and maybe this should get re-examined. And part of that, again, was part of the village's examination of other communities' codes where Lake Bluff chose a path where it set a bright line by a date certain, all structures shall comply, with the exception of the churches, while other communities used at a time at a certain 50% of build out or modifications to a structure would trigger a certain level of demolition or work would trigger the installation of sprinklers. And the village board said, well, maybe we should be doing, or should have done both the whole time. The idea that if people were doing improvements along the way, then the village maybe would be further along on this path to get to this ultimate goal of having all the commercial structures to be fully sprinkled by a date certain. So, so that was another part of the conversation that led to maybe the village should revisit, this exemption from the churches. Should the churches have to follow the same exemption process that may be laid out or approved as part of this amendment? Alternatively, should the existing language be left alone and the churches remain exempt? Or another alternative is maybe there's some other way to address that. But I think that's what's in front of you, and the village board is looking for your expertise as licensed architects. And I guess at this very beginning of this conversation, at the opening of the public hearing, I guess as a staff member, I think Mike and I would ask you all, reviewing the process, reviewing the code language, what other information do you think you will need? Again, this is at the outset, and maybe you don't have to know this tonight, but the idea of what else do you think you need will help you make that decision and give the village board the recommendation it's looking for. So, I know there's members of the churches, I've alerted them to this conversation so that they're aware they were very involved last time. So that you could expect that they'll have questions and that as part of this process and understanding what they may need to go through and in some future, or if there's any amendments made to all with respect to their meeting that code regulation. So I just throw that out there, just kind of a high level. This is where, I think there's lots of different solutions that exist in terms of paths forward, but just want to give you that background.
Thanks, Drew.
So we should ask everyone else who wants to speak tonight to be sworn in together.
Please stand and raise your right hand if anybody intends on speaking. Okay, all right. Do you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth in the testimony you're about to give? If so, please say, I do. I do. Thank you.
Great, and you can come on up and tell us what you want to say, then. The floor is yours.
Good evening. My name's Emily Selby, and I am a trustee of Grace United Methodist Church in Lake Bluff. And this is a very interesting development for us to consider, given that, as all churches are struggling just to pay staff and hold that big old beautiful church together, the idea of trying to retrofit and put in a sprinkler system feels really daunting and pretty much financially not feasible. So I guess my question to you is that an exemption? The fact that literally the church is not in a financial position. Maybe 15 years from now, that would change, but I guess I would appreciate a little clarity about what an exemption looks like.
Sure. Yeah, there's some criteria in the draft code. Let me look at that, and I can read those here. So here's the proposed draft criteria that we would consider. Any unusual or practical difficulties in installing a sprinkler system in the building. So that could be like the construction of the building, if it's stone, walls or something that you can't get pipes in, something like that. The size and location of the building and proximity to adjacent buildings and uses, hazards in and around the building, the occupancy classification, and the occupant load of the building. So, having a building where you have a large number of people assembled in it potentially could be a concern for that, and access to the building for firefighting. Whether the building meets or exceeds the village's code requirements for egress and other life safety requirements. And whether the international codes without amendment would require a fire sprinkler system in the building.
Where can I get a copy of that draft?
Sure, it's on our website. If you
Online?
look at this
Okay.
meeting, the meeting packet for this meeting on the
Okay.
website, you'll find it
Take a
there.
look at that.
Yep.
It still feels kind of vague to me, do you know? I mean, I have no idea what it would cost to do something like that at the church, but I imagine it would be astronomical.
And how much of your building is sprinklered today? I think the classroom wing, the newer wing, is sprinklered.
No,
I'm pretty sure that at least that is.
I don't think so. It was built in 1957. I really don't think it is.
I was in there
Could be
with
wrong.
somebody not too long ago, and it was, I thought, unless I'm remembering it completely
I will
wrong.
check into that, but I don't believe so. I mean, we don't have a school there now anyway. There are no classes or students
Uh-huh.
at this time.
Right.
Not that we wouldn't love to rent out that space, but I will look at, I really don't believe that's the case, but I will look into it.
Okay, yeah, if you could double check.
Okay, thank you. I'll take a better look at the draft.
Sure.
Sure, so we should swear him in if he wasn't sworn in
course.
before.
Do you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth in the testimony you're about to give? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you.
My name's Jerry McDermott. I'm a trustee with the Union Church of Lake Bluff. And I want to just echo some of the comments we just heard, that this is new to us, that this is happening right now. So we're just starting to try to understand what's happening. We appreciate you're giving the background, right? But at first blush, looking at an old church building that I know, Mike, you've been through there, and the cost of doing this would be difficult for a small church with a small membership to handle. And it really is very concerning that we're heading down that path. Hopefully, we're not going to get to that point. But, architecturally, the building is a very significant building. And the cost of making changes to a building like that is going to be very daunting. So I'm just voicing our concern. So, okay.
Understood. You guys have any comments?
I know last time we talked about this, especially with the, just most of these churches are just beautiful vaulted, it's all about the ceiling architecture, and, the Church of the Holy Spirit is beautiful. I mean, they're all beautiful inside. And I can't see just running sprinkler lines across, that hurts me as an architect, as a person. But we did talk about, maybe there's supplemental systems that aren't as intrusive or costly, to supplement or to take place of the sprinkler requirements. And I think we'd have to get a better understanding of what those are, because I think what's going to happen is when one officially comes in front of the board, whatever we do there is going to set precedents for everything. And so I think we can't go about the first one whenever that shows up without having all the knowledge, all the alternatives, with us.
Sure.
So that we can kind of guide this system correctly.
If this is adopted, when will the churches have to comply?
This is 2038, 15 years from the end of this year. So we're giving them the same 15 years that everyone else had.
But prior to this, they were exempt. The churches were just exempt.
Correct. Well, in the original ordinance, which was, 2006, 2007, they had been included, but then in 2010, they were exempted with those revisions, and when the commercial properties were given 15 years in 2010, the churches were exempted.
Got it.
Yeah, so they've been exempt for the last 13 years or so. Yeah, right.
And that was a local exemption, right? I mean, that was just
Correct.
us voting, whoever us were back then.
Right, an exemption from our local amendment requirement for the 2026.
And then what was the impetus to take that exemption away? Is it just, was there a situation at one of the churches that caught on fire? Is it just a general?
No, I think it came from the discussion with the village board that, you know, they realized that the places with the largest assembly, some of the largest concentrations of people were the you know, the very items that were exempt. And they looked at a report, actually, which I shared with them, and I'm not sure if I ever shared it with this board during our process. I'll include it in next meeting's packet, but a report on, you know, analyzing the different tragedies that had happened in buildings without sprinklers and how they could have been prevented and all that.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, that's
sure.
one thing to kind of bear in mind. At the end of the day, it is really a life safety issue you're talking about. It's, you know, it's not like sort of, what's the word I'm thinking of, frivolous.
Right, right. And another consideration is that exemptions can be partial exemptions. So if, you know, if the main room, you can't get sprinklers in there, you've got the basement with fire hazards like kitchens and stuff like that in some of these buildings that it might be worth
Sure.
at least doing the rooms you can more easily do too. So, yeah, do we want to swear in our remaining person and,
You don't have that memorized yet?
No, I don't, sorry. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, in the testimony you're about to give? If so, please say it. Thank you.
My name is Mark Heinman. I'm the pastor at the Union Church. Just a bit of history, and I appreciate that you guys are sorting for what criteria would be for an exemption. What evolved from the previous time through with the board when this initially came up was a really good solution, which was a compromise to me, not an exemption, which was the church ended up installing a central station fire monitoring system, which I think has been that was a really appropriate upgrade in terms of the life safety issues for us as a church. I can guarantee, as someone who has been in the building when that alarm goes off, no one will be in the building for long, lots of egress in our structure. But the other thing that has been really clear is the response time from when the alarm goes off to how quickly the fire department is on site, which I think is one of the other arguments for the fire suppression system, the sprinkling system, is that it gets the fire department there quickly. I think that central station monitoring system, which was part of the agreement that we reached with the board as a compromise, that has really been an effective tool. I just want to make sure you understand that that was a part of the conversation and that was what the board voted on. For us, was not a complete exemption where there's no protection, but a central station 24/7 monitored system. So I just wanted to throw that in.
yeah, that's a good point.
Was that was in 2010?
I want to say it was 2011
2011.
that the install happened.
Okay.
I went back to try and look at that. It was, for us, it was a substantial cost, and we continue to pay to maintain that, and for all kinds of continuing support for that system. But like I said, net gain for everybody. It's a great safety upgrade, but I feel like that may be sufficient.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike, you've been in these buildings. What would be the likelihood that they would comply with the International Building Code requirements for an unsprinkled building for the occupancy and so forth?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that for the churches. I'm not sure what their square footage is or occupant load or what the threshold is.
You don't get
for
a
that.
gut feeling from just walking through.
Yeah, no, I don't. I could double check before next meeting and see if how hard that is to figure out.
That would circumvent the whole conversation if they,
Well, apparently
Well-
that's gonna be one of the criteria.
It's one of the
Yeah.
criteria, yeah.
That, good, and I think a pretty good one as well. I mean, obviously, the International Building Code is vetted considerably by fire safety people and, you know, knowledgeable people, to your point that, you know, we're more or less approaching laymen when it comes to, you know, all the ins and outs of fire safety.
Do we know what, I'm sure we know, this, like what Lake Forest has done with this issue, our surrounding communities? Are we any different than what they're doing? Are we on the same track of what they're doing?
Most of the surrounding communities have a requirement more stringent than the I codes for installing sprinklers during remodel. We're really the only one who did the date certain approach and had a retrofit date.
But with the church, I'm just thinking,
With churches
that I appreciate, but
specifically?
yeah, is there
Yeah,
anything, like, if I walk into like St. Mary's in Lake Forest, am I seeing sprinklers in there?
Yeah, that is a good question. I can check with Lake Forest.
I'm just
on
curious,
that.
you know, just, it's good to see what other people have done,
Right.
if it's worked, if it's created compromises that we can learn from, or,
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't. Drew, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think the only other thing that I would hope would be a part of the process, if things move to that point, would be talking about the actual occupancy in the building. My hunch is folks from outside of Grace or outside of Union probably guess there are more people inside more frequently. As the pastor of the Union Church, I wish there were more people, more frequently. But in a realistic sense, other than Sunday morning, where right now, we, 75, 80 people in person, several hundred people online. Other than that, we used to have AA meetings prior to the pandemic. We don't have AA meetings anymore. We don't have a preschool. We don't cook in the church, with the soup kitchen. We don't have people in the building overnight, like a shelter. And those were all part of that compromise, was if our building use changed, then we would need to upgrade suppression potentially. We decided to have daycare, but we don't. Most Tuesday mornings, there's 15 women in the church. Once a month, there's 15 youth in the church on Friday evening. That's pretty much it. So I would want to have a frank discussion about at least where that data got entered into the discussion.
Well, the building code takes it based on floor areas and so on and so forth that, and maybe there's provisions in the building code to actually do head counts and so forth. But, you have a stadium with 65,000 seats, that's essentially your occupant
Right,
load.
right.
But, if it was a stadium with 65,000 seats where the Bears played, maybe there would be an argument that could be made that the occupant's load would be somewhat less.
Right.
Which goes to your point that, although undoubtedly the sanctuary would seat far more people than actually use it routinely.
And occasionally does for a wedding or a Christmas Eve or something like that. But mostly just checking that with you all and saying, here's an honest sense of building use.
Have you received any estimates of what it would cost to put in a sprinkler
The
system?
estimate I remember was $220,000, and that was 2010, 2011, something like that.
And that was an integrated system that would be under the drywall or is it, was that?
There are a lot of places
if no one has anything else tonight, someone could make a motion to continue to the first meeting in April, April 4th meeting.
Okay.
Well,
Continue. So if you want to
maybe
talk
this
more.
is getting ahead of ourselves.
Sure.
The one question I had was the amendments to the electric code. You can't put wire in a PVC conduit underground?
No, I think you can. Did that, I'll take a look at that. I don't think we meant to, make that
And I was
illegal.
wondering about direct burial cable.
Right, that is allowed outdoors for services.
Okay.
I'll double check to make sure we're not banning that, but I don't think we are.
It seems like it says galvanized metal.
I wonder if that is only inside. I'll have to look and see if that's within a section that says only for indoor wiring or something like that. Hopefully.
No, it says it's only metallic inside.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely says that, but it also said, below grade must be galvanized.
Oh, okay. Well,
But I read it to say, no,
oh, okay. Well, if that's what it says, I'll
I'm
make
not
that change.
completely fluent in codese.
Yeah,
so-
okay. Okay, well, yeah, I'll change that if that's what it says. Thanks.
So can you, just so we're a little more prepared, I always feel like I come to these without enough preparation for these kind of issues. So can you give me or us a kind of like a timeline of where we're going with this and like when we see our first applicant for some kind of exemption?
Sure. Well, so, obviously, we'll probably continue this public hearing till our first meeting in April, April 4th. And then, if you guys are ready to make a recommendation, then it goes to the village board. And the village board to pass an ordinance, does it in 2 readings. They vote on first or second reading, so that'll be two meetings for them. So we're looking at, May is the earliest for the final approval. The ordinance, I think, it says it goes into effect in 90 days, and so 90 days after approval to give people obviously time if they're already working on designing buildings and all that. So, June, July, August, so presumably the earliest we could see applicants for this, I would think, would be August
Okay.
But,
for the exemption.
well, the change, doesn't that reset the clock for 15 years?
No, only churches are given 15 years from today. We're not changing the clock for commercial or multifamily spaces.
So those will come up over a period of time, is that right?
Yeah,
Or-
so the commercial and multifamily buildings just have until January 1st, 2026 to install sprinklers right now. So if they want to apply for an exemption, they should do that
Fairly
relatively
quickly,
soon
yeah.
because they've only got, 2.5 years right now. A little more.
And then do you walk around and inspect? How are the compliances checked?
Well, we already have a list of
That's right, you
unsprinkled
have that,
buildings, so,
yeah.
yeah, so we already know.
So it's there.
Yeah.
And they'd need permits if they were gonna do any sprinkler work, so.
Right, that side I get, yeah, but I forgot you do have that list.
Yeah, right.
Would there be any way to get, before we show up next time, which I won't be here, but for everybody else, could there be some kind of just another, having some expert talk to us, or before we move forward with these recommendations?
Yeah, we could consider that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing. I mean, on both ends.
Right,
of
right,
it.
sure.
And then once we get into it, that we have enough background, to Drew's point about.
Right, okay.
It would seem to me that if you're trying to establish a process, one of the steps in the process would be an evaluation. Now, who pays for the evaluation, the village or the property owner? But, would get a consultant, there's fire guys out there that are, knowledgeable about it and so forth. They could, look at the property and, explain how it does or does not comply and
Right.
give us some
Right,
technical guidance.
right.
Because if a fire prevention person comes in and says, the place is a fire trap, then clearly an exemption maybe is off the table, but if on the other hand, they say, no, there's, very low minimal risk, then, obviously it makes the decision quite a bit different, easier, it seems to me.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have anything else to add?
I guess I just have a question of, what are we being asked to vote on in terms of the exemption process? We're just saying there will be an exemption process, but it's not really clearly defined as to what that is, right?
Well, no, it is
Yeah.
pretty clearly
it
defined.
is?
So it's in this draft,
on
perhaps I
page
should
10.
have given you the reference, yeah. And this is, page 10 of the draft, starting at actually, beginning sort of at the very bottom of page 8, and then,
Yeah.
yeah. And then going through 9 and 10 and 11.
But in terms of the criteria for granting an exemption, is that written down in here?
Yeah, that's section
That's
C,
C.
toward the bottom of page 10, and going on to
sorry.
11.
The exemptions. I guess my
Even
concern.
this seems a
go ahead.
little vague.
Yeah, that was my question, is that, I think we would need someone to say, size and location of building, proximity to adjacent buildings, if it's so many feet away, just a
Well,
little bit more, some of it's common sense-ish.
the
but-
difficulty in defining something like that is everything's interrelated. So
Right.
how close you might want it to something that's a hazard
Yep,
is
right.
different depending on, is it a building for 10 people or a building for 1,000 people? You might.
Right.
So, it.
100%, that's why I'm saying there's a lot of moving parts in this
But the building
matrix.
code tends to talk about that, distance from adjacent structures, the open space surrounding it, and so
Correct.
forth, as to the fire rating and so on and so forth. So, it would seem to me that to have someone knowledgeable say that this is the situation, it complies with the forest use, it complies with the building code. But, it might also, the same report might say, it doesn't comply with the building code, it needs this distance to adjacent structures, it needs 150 feet and it has 5,
Right. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
true, but but also in addition to, what you're saying is correct, but in addition to that, if they're exceeding some requirements by a large margin, it might be part of their argument in favor of getting the exemption to
Absolutely,
other requirements.
absolutely, but-
So it's not just a matter of meeting the number.
Right.
Right.
But the question is who kind of presents those facts to us is what
Right.
you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can bring a consultant in to do
I just
that.
don't want to be learning with each case,
Right,
if we
right,
can help
exactly.
it. That's
Yeah.
just not fair to anybody,
Right.
and it will be a learning for something because every case is going to be what they have. If they already have some kind of, system that was approved before versus another situation where there's nothing there yet, So there are going to be, I don't know if it means there's a tour of the building, or the church, before we vote on it. It just seems daunting in a good way and in a bad way for us,
Right.
to make these just with some kind of verbal description, or I don't know what kind of documentation they would have to present in front of us. I think there needs to be some clarity in that. But for now, what you need us to do is approve kind of like 8 through.
Well, yeah, I mean, this
Or,
whole
the whole-
draft.
the
is
whole
really
draft,
what's
but
up
that's,
for-
per this topic, you know, that's, but, okay.
We're just giving a recommendation to the board is what my
Right.
understanding is what we're trying to do, so that they can make a final vote on this document. Is that,
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
so the challenge is simply that they're changing what they said they were doing in 2010.
Yeah,
So, and that puts a, you know, a hardship on both of the churches. That's really, to me, that's like the biggest thing right there.
Yep.
So, and life safety it's an issue. We deal with it all the time with our buildings, all day, every day, right? But they make us fire sprinkler new residences now. So, and those are larger institutions, but there's also a major financial hit to do it. So, it's, you know, for us to sit here and, you know, impose that kind of hardship on somebody is, you know, it's not to be taken lightly, that's the issue.
right. That's correct.
On the other side of it, if we're sitting here and say, well, we're against it totally, and then the thing happens, right, you know, it's even worse. So, you know, it sounds like there was some sort of compromise that was met, and so we need to understand that a little bit more before we can just sign off on this and give the board, you know, that recommendation that they're looking for, so then they're just kind of putting it back on our plate and saying, oh, you guys make it right, and then we'll pass it. I mean,
It does seem, though, that this document allows for a compromise. I mean, if you look at,
There's
read the
some
last paragraph here, you know, you can, through a series of discussions, reach a partial exemption or a compromise.
Yeah,
Obviously, the goal is to maximize life safety.
totally.
And every situation is different, and hopefully this document would allow for a process where each case can be presented individually, and a decision can be made, you know,
Right.
through a group of people.
that's correct. I just wanted the knowledge or the information to help make that compromise, correct, for all parties, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right, right.
It's not to me, this isn't subjective like signs, and, you know, this is the most serious thing that we're gonna deal with. And it'd be good to, just for me, just to make sure that we're handling it correctly on both, you know, to Ed's point, both ends. Chairman Ed, pro tem.
Chairman Ed, temporarily.
Temporary.
Chairman Ed,
Yeah,
okay.
there's a lot riding on either end of this, so.
So I think that's a nice transition into, we need to continue this discussion, so that's what would happen in April presumably.
Right,
Okay,
yep.
so can somebody make a motion to continue the conversation?
I make a motion to continue this conversation
To April 4th?
There you go.
to April 4th.
Yep.
So, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the public hearing is continued to April 4th. Then I guess we just need another motion to adjourn, then. if no one
Motion to
has
adjourn,
any- so-
Second?
done.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned.
Great job, Ed. Way to volunteer.
Well done.